This sound is the sound that reminds many of us of our childhoods. Hearing the truck pull up and blare out this sound for all the kids on the street to come and spend their parents' hard-earned money on creamy iced treats. Simpler times. But to some this sound means something completely different. How about territorial gang warfare? Maybe? Hello! Welcome to Brain Spill, the laziest show on the internet. My name is Tank, and today we're talking about a rather odd event that occurred in the 1980s, in, of course, Glasgow, Scotland. Because of course it was there. Glasgow had a number of ice cream vendors in which you'd be pretty annoyed if the local whippy pulled up and started selling ice cream to people that you regularly go to. That's just bad sportsmanship. But the real issue here isn't the ice cream, because the people who sold ice cream also sold drugs. Lots of them. Drugs, stolen goods, whatever these criminals could get their hands on, they sold to people in the local area using their ice cream trucks. The perfect ruse to run a legitimate mobile business, whilst also running an illegitimate drug peddling operation from a mobile truck. In the 1980s, a lot of people got into this trade mainly so they could start to expand their influence, and in certain areas they would be known as the go-to guy in order to get whatever drugs or paraphernalia you wanted to get your hands on. This became so popular, in fact, that this would eventually become, well, somewhat of a gang matter, with people having different turfs and beefs with each other, which could eventually lead to all-out gang warfare if you were to sell your ice cream to the wrong people. This would escalate to all-out turf wars if you were caught selling your 99p whippy with a flake in someone else's neighbourhood. Infighting between rival operators of the vans was close to boiling point. Violence and intimidation were almost daily occurrences as the factions vied for territory. This was all fairly local until an incident hit the headlines on the 16th of April 1984, with the murder by arson of 6 members of the Doyle family. Andrew Fatboy Doyle, aged 18, a driver for the machete firm, refused to be intimidated into distributing drugs on his route, to which an unknown man fired a shotgun into his truck, which shattered the windscreen. An attempt to intimidate the man into doing their drug peddling bidding. Despite this, however, the man was undeterred and refused to give in. So what they call a frightener was sent to his house at 2 a.m. in order to teach him a lesson. However, the plans didn't quite go to plan. A door on the landing outside his family's flat was doused in petrol and set alight whilst his family slept inside. Within minutes, the fire sprawled into an uncontrollable blaze, with the Doyle family losing 6 family members that night. As you might imagine, when this story hit the headlines, this became national news, and there was certainly public outcry, mainly due to the fact that innocent people were caught up in these ice cream wars. Wars which were now in the public consciousness. Strathclyde police arrested several people over the following months, eventually charging 6. 4 were tried and convicted of offences relating to these vendettas. However, 2 individuals in particular were found to be central in this crime ring: Thomas T.C. Campbell and Joe Steele. A trial was heard for these 2 men on the charges of murder, to which there was witness evidence to suggest that these 2 were overheard plotting the punishment they would inflict on Mr. Doyle for his refusal to get involved in their planned operations. Mr. Campbell, giving a rather different alibi, claimed that he was at home with his wife during the time of the incident, claiming that it couldn't have been him because he physically wasn't there. What really didn't help the guy was that he had quite a bad criminal record in his past, so, for someone to do something like this, the public would probably assume it would be somebody like Campbell, even if, well, he didn't do it. After some further investigation, not only had it been discovered that he'd actually done these types of scare tactics before, but he even went on record saying to the police, and I quote, "The fire at the Fat Boys was only meant to be a frightener which went too far." I don't know about you, but alibi or not, a confession is a pretty good indication that we potentially have a bullshitter on our hands. Anywho, after some further investigation, another piece of damning evidence came to light, which was apparently a map discovered in Campbell's apartment, which basically showed a map of the area and Mr. Doyle's house having a big X over it. Clearly, an intention to do something to his house. What, you're gonna go deliver ice cream there or something? Nah. This was all adding up to a story that I think most people presumed that he may have done it. They had no actual forensic evidence, but by this point, the jury had quite simply seen enough. Mr. Campbell and Mr. Steele were tried for the murders, convicted unanimously to life in prison, primarily based on the evidence provided by a witness who had apparently seen the pair plotting the event of the fire. I mean, I sort of understand at the time why a guilty verdict would have been reached in the face of this evidence. And, well, too right. Things were getting pretty out of control, and in light of all this evidence, they needed to get some justice one way or another. However, the outcome wasn't a joyous celebration that they'd found the people who they thought were responsible, but it was more so a somber sadness. Basically, this is something that should never have happened in the first place. There were no winners in this. The Doyle family had lost 6 family members due to the ice cream drug peddling business, and the public were seemingly annoyed that nothing more was being done to prevent this sort of crime from happening, and for a family to have to suffer as a result of it. Whilst a lot of this was reported on at the time, a lot of people now know what happened years later when people came forward with more lengthy accounts of what actually happened. The pair, who were convicted and imprisoned, went through a lengthy set of protests and appeals, be it hunger strikes, prison breakouts, demonstrations, political pressure, solitary isolation, prison beatings, and many legal appeals to be eventually granted bail in the year 1996, pending a second appeal. It was believed that one of the key witnesses had potentially lied in their evidence. After some further appeals and eventually going to the appeal court, it was decided that the appeal would be successful, on the basis that they believed that there may have been some misdirection involved when it came to getting the jury to make a decision on whether they should be found guilty or not. And by misdirection, the wording they used was significant misdirection. This was decided upon the basis of misinterpreting the apparent admission made by Mr. Campbell. Ultimately, the process of how the convictions came about were considered a miscarriage of justice, and the men were released shortly afterwards. This rollercoaster of events, the Ice Cream Wars, is considered one of the most turbulent and well-known legal cases in Scottish history. Mr. Campbell even went on record and tried to get a fresh investigation opened up to find out who was responsible for what happened. However, the police decided ultimately that a lot of time had passed and that their efforts may be fruitless, in that the police decided that it would be very unlikely that they would ever catch the true culprit of whoever caused this to happen. With zero fresh evidence, there is just no way to determine who could have caused it. Who knows, maybe it was them, maybe it wasn't, but at the end of the day, this is a rather infamous chapter in Scottish history, all down to some ice cream trucks. If you guys like that video, here's another one just like it. I'll see you guys in the next video. Fantastic.